Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 6 of Beers with VCs, where we have casual conversations about the less talked about aspects of venture capital and startup building. We are your hosts, Sabrina Passman and Simon Lancaster, and today we're very excited to be joined by Alex Huckstep. He is an engineer turned BD, and he's done business development for all of the most cutting edge manufacturing technology companies in the past 10 years, from 3D printing to metal forming. And he's developed some incredible insights about how to scale deep tech companies. We are thrilled to have him on the podcast. Alex, welcome. How are you doing today?
Thanks, guys.
Welcome.
Very nice, very nice. Of course. Okay, we'll start with the beer question. Show us what beers you're doing today. I'll start us off. Today I have a Mango Bomb. Have not had this before, but it seems very large and intense. So we'll see how this hour goes.
So I'm like a little embarrassed. I have like the quintessential like douchey
Nice.
beer, which is a
Not bad.
hazy IPA.
Yeah.
I thought I had something. I thought I actually had something more interesting in the fridge, and I ran up there and
anything
that's it.
hazy is delicious.
it's tasty. It's tasty, but I like
Yeah.
like a good ale. A good ale.
Oh, like European style?
Like a darker ale, like an amber ale, a Belgian ale. Oh,
Yeah. Very nice, very nice. And Simon?
Okay, so today I have a triple filtered, extra soft glass of San Jose tap water. So I'm sorry to disappoint, but that's my choice for today.
Woohoo!
Cheers.
Very nice.
Sorry,
Cheers,
I drank
everyone.
before cheersing.
Cheers.
It's good. We gotta look each other in the eyes.
Oh, at least I have a nicer glass.
Oh yeah, you got the fancy glass. Winner. Awesome. Alex, we're super excited to have you. We'd love to just open up with your background. So going into what companies you helped scale, what stage you're at when you joined, and maybe even starting from your college days as an engineer.
Yeah, sure. So got undergrad engineering degree from USC down in LA. Did actually my master's there too in product development engineering, which is kind of a hybrid between engineering and sort of business entrepreneurial studies. And then was actually an engineer for a couple years, doing kind of project implementation for a software company, but quickly realized that I was interested in sales and business development and like really helping customers to kind of adopt the technology. And at the same time, this was like peak 3D printing, hype cycle, like 2012, I think it was. And joined Stratasys, one of the original kind of old school 3D printing companies, doing sales for their service bureau division. So selling parts made via 3D printing. And then joined Carbon, which might be a more familiar name, based in the Silicon Valley here. Was one of the first sales hires there, kind of heading up automotive, aerospace, kind of the more engineered industries. And then joined a metal 3D printing startup in Boston called Digital Alloys. Unfortunately, that company didn't make it. And then was doing composites advanced manufacturing with Aris in Berkeley before joining Makina about a year ago, heading up our business development and sales at Makina, which we'll talk more about.
Totally. All of the coolest things the past 10 years, I feel like you've touched in some shape, way, or form. I'd love to dive first. Yeah, I'd love to dive first into the 3D printing area. And I feel like it had such an interesting hype cycle to watch over the past 10 years. A lot of venture dollars went towards it in 2010, but I feel like the returns haven't quite lived up to the expectation. I'd love your insights into like what happened, basically what went wrong or what went right.
It's been a wild ride for the 3D printing industry. It's been kind of crazy to watch the amount of VC investment dollars that have kind of chased additive manufacturing companies over the last few years, especially in that like 2018 to 2021 kind of phase. And I think it started to look like a little ridiculous 2-3 years ago when you just had a dozen companies in the same category with virtually the same technology, right? With their own kind of marketing spin on it. I mean, one example is like laser powder bed, right? There doesn't need to be 30 laser powder bed 3D printing companies in the world. And there won't be, right? It's just not sustainable. The market's not big enough. And so anyway, I think it was kind of obvious that there would be some consolidation, but there's also just been so much contraction in like the values.
Mhm.
Got public a couple years ago and have gotten just destroyed in terms of the price.
Yeah. I think everyone was sold on the vision, I think, of 3D printing from the start of like you could make anything in any situation at like on site immediately. And having worked in industry myself, I see that there are obviously some hurdles around even implementing in mass production settings that, are slowly being overcome, I'd say. But from your experience actually dealing with companies and working at these companies trying to differentiate, like what is your strategy for first seeing their short-term vision and then second differentiation?
Yeah, I mean it's tough because you've had a lot of these 3D printing companies that have built, or let's just say advanced manufacturing kind of technology companies that have raised a lot of money and been able to build up pretty big marketing teams, and pretty like sophisticated, marketing kind of strategies. And it's really hard to, and there's been some pretty, ridiculous claims that have been made, right, around speed, around quality, around like what it's applicable for, what it can do. So it's really tough in that kind of space to kind of cut through the noise. And I think the best way to do it is with really kind of pointed authenticity. Like figure out what you're really good at, and have conviction that that is where you uniquely create a lot of value, and market that very specific message to those people where it's going to resonate. Because the broad like, we 3D print 1,000 times faster. We're making planes, cars, medical implants, you name it. Like it's overdone.
Totally. So I think it sounds like the downfall was it was a really cool technology that had such a wide set of potential applications that it was unstructured, I guess. And that's why, because everyone's marketing pitch became too inclusive of everything and they weren't.
No, I think it still does. I mean, you can't call it a technology, right? It's so many different technologies, just like there are hundreds of manufacturing conventional manufacturing processes that coexist. There will be tons of 3D printing technologies, processes that coexist too. There is value for sure in a lot of them, but some of them are just too niche, right? Like the market's just not big enough. They're not going to grow into sort of the valuation that they raised at, or the plan that they had for how to build a company. If their technology is really only good for making like these widgets and there's only a few companies that need those, that's a totally different looking company than a big VC backed high flying kind of business. So I think we'll see some of those kind of disappear or get gobbled up. But I'm still like really bullish long term on 3D printing. There's like a lot of really amazing use cases still that you can find, but it's taking a while to catch up. I mean, like everyone knows, manufacturing is hard, right? Like you got to really hit the requirements, especially in high value applications. The quality bar is really high. It takes a long time to get there.
I think that's actually a really good transition of like venture backability around new technologies. Speaking of, really want to congratulate you on the announcement of your Series B raise with Machina, and would love to understand more about what makes this technology different and anything that you'd love to tell us about the company.
Yeah, thanks. So yeah, it's been an exciting week at Machina. It's actually been exciting, like last month or so. We've had a lot of visibility, product announcements, now the Series B. We announced that we're selling our system a few weeks ago at FabTech, where I saw you, Sabrina.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So we officially announced we're actually shipping the first system just in a couple of weeks now to kind of the first customer. But now it's kind of general availability that we're rolling out the systems to customers. So let me take a step back. What do we do, right? So we are using massive robots to shape sheet metal. You can think of like a potter kneading clay, right, as the kind of mechanism that we use to pinch and stretch sheet metal. So we have one robot on either side of the sheet, and we follow a tool path, kind of like 3D printing or CNC machining, to draw a usually large, complex, compound curvature part out of a sheet of metal. So it's a formative process. It's not additive. We're not subtracting material. We're just taking a sheet and we're deforming its shape. And you can think of it like a digital stamping, or you can think of it like 3D printing kind of for sheet metal. And so the problem it solves is that sheet metal is one of the largest manufacturing industries in terms of material type. But to manufacture sheet metal, usually you're bending it into simple like origami shapes. But if you want something complex and curved, you're stamping it or you're forming it with really expensive dies. So we're solving the problem of really the cost of the lead time, the cost of the dies, the infrastructure that you need, the kind of factories that you have to build, like product specific for what you're trying to do, and all of the kind of rigidity and risk that's associated with that. So yeah, that's what we do. The company was founded about 4.5 years ago. About 60 people. We're based in LA. We just announced a Series B of $32 million. So we've raised about 45 now in total. And yeah, we're really excited about the next couple of years here of kind of really expanding, continue to develop the product, getting a lot more systems out with a lot more customers, building out our LA facility too with a lot more systems.
That's amazing. I can attest to how freaking cool the robotic system is. Seeing it live at FabTech was absolutely insane. And my experience with sheet metal forming, obviously, I'm always done very small scale things in consumer electronics, but the number of dies you'd have to create, the tooling is astronomical. And any design change that you want to make requires so many different process step changes and so much time, so much money wasted. And it's so cool to see Makina solve that for very large scale parts, let alone, which are expensive in themselves, but getting to do that live is pretty impressive. If you haven't seen their website, go check it out because they have an awesome video there that you can see.
Or just follow Alex.
Or follow Alex.
He's always posting great videos.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those things. It's like hard, it's hard to describe the process, but you see it and it kind of makes sense and it clicks.
Yeah, definitely. I want to pivot into some tactical advice for the founders. So I think a lot of folks on in our audience are technical engineers that either have a good idea or they work at a larger tech company and are dreaming of building something. And a common sentiment among this type of persona is that build it and they will come. And this is something that I myself have been very much lied to. I thought that was so true coming out of my engineering degree. But in reality, building the best possible product and is very different than building a successful company. Talk us through the hurdles with that mentality and your experience as being the first non-founder at some of these new deep tech companies. How do you structure it, and how do you sort of pivot away from product to actually scaling the business itself?
Yeah, I think there's a lot there. And I completely agree with the premise. Like, maybe there's some really lucky consumer products, right, that just like achieved some crazy virality, but it doesn't really happen in B2B. It doesn't happen in hard tech. Part of the reason is that, like, if you have something really valuable, guess what? Your customers don't want other customers to know about it, right? They want that for themselves. Then they don't want to talk about it. Kind of the cooler it is, the more secretive it is, right? In the enterprise world, at least for I would say for like advanced manufacturing.
That's
technology.
A really interesting point. Yeah.
So questions around like being the first kind of sales BD leader, right? Non-founder kind of leader dedicated to that. It's tough, but it's fun. I mean, that's obviously why I keep doing it. Founders have usually, once you've gotten to like the Series A, sort of Series A, B stage where you're really building out a sales team, the founder obviously knows how to sell, right? He's at least sold VCs, has sold people on joining the company. He or she has probably sold the first, few pilot customers. But I think that there's a big difference between finding, a couple first pilot customers, if you will, and really having a repeatable kind of sales go-to-market motion that you can build a team around. Founders have some superpowers, right? Like they tend to be, at least in the advanced manufacturing technology world, they tend to be very technical. They tend to have, if they come from other companies, they may have some incredible networks. Oftentimes investors, right, are introducing them to some really innovative kind of technology adopters, and so they have that kind of working. But the first thing I think that I try to do is really just understand, where does this technology create value? And it may not actually be where the first set of customers were. Like, you could have gotten lucky. Someone may have made a bet. It might have been a personal relationship. Someone may have made a bet on the founder versus like that they would figure it out versus like the tech really kind of being close to ready. But yeah, I think just being extremely open-minded about where does the technology fit? Where does it create value? What can you learn so far about feedback from the market, which usually hasn't been collected in any structured way at that point. But how do you start to build out the infrastructure, Salesforce or whatever CRM tools, have some sort of way to really capture the types of companies, the types of titles, the people that are interested in what you do, the types of technical details and requirements about where the technology fits and where you're getting some early traction and pull. And it's a really noisy, crazy landscape at first, but you're sort of connecting the dots. And yeah, like I should have mentioned when I was talking about my background that like I know Simon, right, from Eris when we were doing this together with the new composites technology. And there's so many different ways that can be used in virtually every industry now is adopting composites. And as a small company, where do you put your time and focus? Because you can't serve everyone.
Totally. And how do you go about finding the first one? I think it's finding the right first customer can really make or break a company because you need that early revenue, you need that early win as a baseline for how to replicate it. Like, do you have any advice, like, I guess generally of how to separate
green flags, red flags, even.
Yeah, exactly.
Like things to look for.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple like psychological things. There's a couple sort of tricks that can be used for sort of filtering what is a good customer, what's a good application. One is just making them pay for it. A lot of times early companies just start giving stuff away, right? They just want people to use it. They want to get feedback, and they just kind of start spraying it, right? Forcing customers to pay, not so much about a huge sum of money early on, but the sort of commitment, the filter that it creates, so that they actually have to go through some sort of justification. And if you can put a big enough price tag on it too, then it really requires that it gets up to a high enough person in the org that there has to be some sort of real justification, business case built for adopting it. So that's like kind of an easy, obvious one. But really understanding like kind of who the technology creates value for, like whose problems is it solving?
Like from the stakeholder perspective in the
like who oftentimes people will start selling to the user of the equipment, like in the case of 3D printing, whereas usually you gotta get high enough to figure out like where is this actually making a business impact, and who's going to actually write the check to justify this long-term investment that they're going to have to make. So those are some of the things. There's also the constant like paradox between like, do you work with R&D because it's a new technology, or do you just try to sort of jam it straight into like a product program? And sort of it depends on the company, I'd say, or the industry in a lot of cases. Some R&D teams are really good at helping you develop it and putting it into sort of production in some way. And then some R&D teams at certain companies just sort of become these gatekeepers. And I like to call it like POC purgatory, right? You'll just end up doing science projects for years, right? And they'll keep kind of teasing you along with it. And then one day it might just dry up.
Yeah.
Been on both sides of that fence, fortunately. Can't say I didn't get a bunch of startups to do a bunch of free work at some point in my career.
I know. I mean,
But,
it's a hard thing to balance too, because you're trying to provide value. Like, and I want to underscore one of the points that you just made, Alex, is that the person that's actually paying for your tech is often not the same person in the organization that finds it valuable. And figuring out how to pitch simultaneously to both of those and say that like this value that's created at this lower level, like straight up engineering, is going to benefit the organization in these ways economically is often really hard to bridge the gap of when your technology is so new. And I wonder, like, do you have any? It's kind of a amorphous question because there's so many factors and technology specific. I'd imagine of how you'd like strategize that to like satisfying those two different parties simultaneously. But what can founders take like earlier in their process to like start thinking about that earlier, maybe, or like should they even think about it earlier? Like, what are the most? Maybe I'll ask the question of like what has been the most successful way to enter organizations? Like what have you seen amongst your background so far, like common threads between the companies in which enterprise sales have been more seamless than others? Is there anything?
yeah, I mean, I think the first kind of most fundamental one is like you got to figure out what problem you're solving, right? Like what value you're creating. And if the customer doesn't see that as a problem too, if you're not aligned on that, right? Like you're it's already dead right from the start. So I think making sure that just because you think that you're doing something valuable for a company, like they have to be aligned with you, that is a real problem, or you have to make them see the problem, right? Sometimes that's the starting point. But from then on, like I think that really you need to understand all the stakeholders. You need to figure out like who can write the check, who can kill this thing, right? Classic kind of enterprise sales, like org mapping and knowing who are your sponsors, who are your anti-sponsors. But really, I think to efficiently sell into an enterprise, you have to have some really great champions, and they're doing a lot of the selling for you. So you got to identify, at least one person that really sees kind of the vision, the light at the end of the tunnel, and will help you navigate the org. They'll help you sell internally. Like, how much more impactful it is, right? If your colleague tells you like, oh, we need to get this new product, it's so cool, versus a salesperson, right? They just walked in, that pulled up a slide deck. So I think that's really key. Like galvanizing a champion, giving that champion the tools that they need to help sell you, making sure you're completely aligned with them on kind of the plan.
So for those of us who maybe haven't encountered a champion before, again, I've been on both sides of that. I think maybe, we might have met that way and vice versa. But what, in your mind, when you think of a champion, what's the picture? Describe this person, this hypothetical person. What are they
personality, where in the org are they?
Ideally, it's got to be someone that has some sort of tenure and influence, right? Okay. If it's too low, an intern can be obsessed with your product and may run around the company, right, screaming about it, but it's not going to usually work out that way. Okay. Yeah. So right. So someone that's like actually kind of an authority, right, in your domain. Like so using the example of like 3D printing. So usually some sort of engineering, design, manufacturing leader, right, that actually has credibility within the company and has some level of authority, even if they're not the CTO, right? They can still really understand how to help the company adopt and implement it, and work with you to do that.
And still has the energy to stick their neck out and go.
I was going to say too, like they have to be. It's great if they have track record of doing this before, too. And you can kind of, it's like hiring someone, right? You want to see if they've done it before, if they have the experience. But that you're not often gonna find that or know that. I think it's more just you have to pick up like just working with that person and talking with them a lot. You'll start to kind of feel the fit, so to speak. They got to be energized, and like there are some people that there are some technologists that will work with every company in a space, right? And like you can't be a champion of 10 different things at the same time effectively. So you should have a little bit of like a spidey sense for that too.
Interesting.
Like if you get caught into a trap of being vetted against just a bunch of competitors versus them actually being interested in your specific technology.
Oh, well, that's almost a whole nother thing in a sense. Like, yeah, the whole like benchmarking, exercise of like, let's send this one part to 12 different companies and see what they do. But no, like just in the sense that like a technology champion can only handle so many big initiatives at the same time. And they're just not going to be effective if they're trying to ram 10 different unrelated technologies into a company.
Yeah.
Totally.
And their credibility will be higher if they focus typically versus having a lot. Yeah. It's a good one.
So how do you go about, I don't know if the right, like courting them? Like, how do you, once you find them and you're like, you are the guy, I know it. Like, how do you go about making
Why do you assume it's a guy?
I apologize, male or female. Or
So yeah, like, the courtship. So ideally, they find you, right? Like, ideally, you've started to put out some sort of thought leadership, right? You've shared videos on LinkedIn. You've showed up to trade shows with some demo. You've done kind of the prerequisite work to kind of build some awareness and interest. And the real like early adopters will tend to find you because they'll be looking for, solutions to their problems. And that's a great sign, not again like a prerequisite, but a great sign. But then there's a lot of tire kickers there too, right? So like filtering those is really important. But yeah, it's not like, I don't think it's rocket science. It's like spending time with someone and building a relationship and really understanding, trying to understand from their perspective, like why they're interested and what they're going to get out of it and what problem they're going to solve and how you can kind of build a game plan with them to help them solve it and understand like how their company works and how they think about new technology and implementing it and what are the phases. Do you start with a sort of simple proof of concept because you can get some small quick budget approved and you can kind of build a foundation and then move into something kind of more complex, maybe a larger kind of commitment. It's usually kind of like a phased approach. Like, I don't know, you go out, on a first date and then you sort of start getting more serious.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The navigation of like the interpersonal relationship in addition to like, I guess the secret though is like value creation is what you lead with. And actually that's an interesting point. How important then is a like LinkedIn presence, or like, I know you do a lot of content creation and thought leadership with your own brand. Would you say that's a requisite for getting any new tech company out there?
I don't know if it's a requisite. I think I found that it's the most powerful platform for finding, once you have a sense of your kind of ideal customer profile, your ICP, like it's the most efficient way to sort of navigate industries, companies, find people. And then oftentimes actually reach out to them, right? To actually start the conversation there too. But even if not, some people kind of build a LinkedIn profile and then never log in for 3 years. At least you can still kind of find them. Most people are on there at this point. So if you want to talk to the VP of manufacturing at some tier 2 auto supplier, like 95% of the time, right? You can find that person in a couple clicks. So that's really the power. If you can then, share stuff and kind of build out a network there, you will get a lot of organic reach and kind of conversations that start that way. But there's a lot of prospecting tools. I think it really starts with, if you're selling a manufacturing technology kind of product, which is where I've lived, there's so many different applications and industries. You got to start with some level of conviction around where it makes sense, so that you can build kind of a motion and a strategy around who you're going to talk to, what you're going to talk about, because you can't just sort of just like spray and have a million random conversations and develop a process around that.
Yeah,
you can do that a bit at first and learn from it, but you can't do that for too long.
Totally. It has to be more of like, I guess, a sniper approach. At the end of the day, you have to really deeply understand each individual company and persona within the company that you're going after, and then that type of relationship takes time to build, is what I'm gathering. Yeah. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I we had a question around founder-led sales, and I wanted to get just firstly, can you define it for the audience, and then your perspectives on that versus the other strategies that we've been speaking about so far? When
Yeah,
does
I
it
think
make
founder-led sales is just sort of that sort of organic approach that happens early on at companies because the founders are the salespeople. They're also usually the the engineers and the admins and whatever else needs to be done. So yeah, founder-led sales I think usually just denotes that like there's not a dedicated sales person or team in place yet, and so those early, they may not even be revenue generating yet, but like the customer interactions, right? Finding customers, starting to work with them, tends to be founder led. And then there's kind of this critical phase where a founder either gets too busy doing it or says, I don't like doing it, or says like, we're ready to just pour fuel on the fire. That they're like, okay, let's hire someone to kind of take this function responsibility over.
And when does that? Oh yeah, go for it, Simon.
Yeah, thanks, Sabrina. I think one of the interesting things that you basically like assumed in that statement, which I agree with, is that the founders are doing the sales until they hire an external sales person or like hire someone from the outside. And that's not always the case. I think a lot of founders, especially technical founders, start companies, develop the product, hopefully with customer feedback, sometimes without customer feedback, not recommended. But then they eventually think the product's ready. Okay, let's hire a salesperson to sell it. And I think we're on the same page.
I've never seen that work. I've never seen that work.
Yeah, it will never work.
Yeah. Like,
so as a founder, become good at sales, regardless of if you were good at it before or not, because you're going to need to do it for customer acquisition, like understanding customers, figuring out your go-to-market, and fundraising. If you're venture backed, is essentially business development and sales as well.
Raising money, hiring, but like I feel like it's a really dangerous dynamic if the founder doesn't actually want to talk to customers. At the end of the day, like you're building a product to help a customer do something, right? If you don't actually want to talk to that customer and like learn from them and understand how you're solving their problem, I would question sort of just like the motivation and sort of where you're coming from building something that's new. But regardless, I think that like I bet a lot of technical founders are very uncomfortable selling, but they have to get comfortable pretty fast to build a successful business. But they have to, like you said, they have to build a really good intuition for the sort of sales, marketing, distribution strategy, because it is intrinsic to the product itself, right? Like you have to design no matter what the product is, someone is going to use it, and you cannot build it in a vacuum.
Absolutely. And I think, as we keep touching on, that user feedback early on in the process is requisite in order to understand not just how to sell your product ultimately, but also like how to tell the story around your product, how to communicate the value of it. I guess, do you have any advice for when, I think we're all aligned that like customer discussions need to be happening the entire time. There's not like a phase of like, I guess once your product feels ready, you got to immediately start asking customers their perspective on it, because it may have to
I think way earlier than that. I've seen some of the best founders just before they've even incorporated a company, right? They're going out there and they're pitching this idea to the actual end customer to validate that. Yeah. So I think it's got to start even earlier.
Pre-product even then.
Yeah.
Cool. And then it like shortens the cycle. I mean, may not shorten the cycle, but at least it gets you to the most important values as early as possible. And you're not floundering, having spent so much time and energy building something that you've never tested with anyone. And I think the trap that a lot of really technical founders fall into is like, if I build what I think is the best product in the entire world, of course, the whole world is going to see it that way too. It's not just like, I know technical, like I know how to build something well. But most of the time, it doesn't matter how good or technical your product is if it doesn't actually solve the problems that are being experienced at the wider organization level. Very hard lesson to learn. I'm very excited to keep hammering that into all the founders that we meet too.
And maybe just one just like quick point on that too is like, I think it's really, unless you've done something yourself for a certain amount of time, how do you hire for that position too? How do you know when you're ready to hire someone? Because hiring someone's a huge investment of time, money, equity. You can burn so many cycles if you're not ready or you hire the wrong person. So I think that's a critical thing too.
It's a really good point. Like every aspect, some of the most amazing founders that I've met have spanned the gamut of understanding every single facet of their business. I think as a VC, we're very interested in building teams that are very well balanced with at least someone on the team that understands how to do each aspect of the company well. Some of the best founders, though, are not afraid to like roll up their sleeves and learn all of it, particularly single founder companies. That's the reality of the situation. You can't just outsource all of the things that you don't fully understand. And it comes back to, if you don't know how to do it, then you, as you're saying, Alex, you can't hire for it effectively. So yeah, very much agree with that point. So I had a question around when should founders, is there ever an instance in which founders should ignore customer feedback and trust their gut instead? Have we ever seen that work?
I wouldn't say ignore. I wouldn't say ignore customer feedback, but certainly don't just accept all customer feedback as your product roadmap, right? I don't know, like the cliche, like Henry Ford, line about like, my customers would have told me they wanted faster horses, right? Like that's an extreme, but I think that customers are really good at giving you feedback of things they think are cool or that things that they think they want, but you really want to get to the core of like, why do they want it? Because oftentimes I think there's a couple layers of abstraction where they like, I don't know, to make things like, to give an example, in our world of sheet metal forming, a customer might say, oh, I need a really smooth part. Therefore I need you to figure out how to form a part, right, from your process that's like a mirror smooth. And I believe that like they do need, if they think they need a smooth part, they may need a smooth part, but there's a lot of ways to get there, right? Should we do some sort of post-processing off the system? Does it even make sense to integrate it? There's a lot of questions that I think you want to ask about to get to the core of the actual need, but then to figure out the right actual product solution for it. But regardless, like you're going to get 100 pieces of feedback early on from customers, and you can only address some of them. So you got to have a really good framework for like figuring out what's actually broadly like valuable, not just to like one random person. What's their actual an actual need, that has some economical market to address there, and can you address it profitably? Like, what are the alternatives? There's so many other dimensions, I think, to go from customer suggestion to let's build it.
Definitely. Is it, in order to get through those layers that you've mentioned of what they say they want versus what they actually need, is it mostly just continually asking why to things in calls, or like do you do outside research, cross-reference across different industries and different companies to understand if this is common? Like, what are your strategies for actually digging down to the root?
Well, I guess I should clarify that, like, as a BD sales leader, you also need a really strong product function within your company too, that should be doing a lot of kind of what you just described. But you also, as the kind of BD sales team, you're on the front lines, you're in the trenches, you're usually hearing a lot of the feedback naturally. And then you're either kind of pulling your product teams into those conversations, or at least you're trying to play the telephone game and get them the feedback. And maybe there's some follow-up conversation that happens there. But no, I mean, product management and building roadmaps, that's an incredibly like difficult thing to do. And I can't pretend like I'm an expert at that, but I can give my perspective on the business side of like, okay, we're hearing this from every customer. This isn't like a random one-time request. And we know that if we can solve this, it unlocks this other market, right? Or whatever it may be for our technology. So at least providing that perspective.
Totally. Love that perspective. And I think that answers a lot of the questions that I've had have been very clearly answered. I'm really excited about figuring out how to communicate this to all of the founders that we interact with and show the benefit and how to bridge going from just having an idea to actually getting it scalably useful to a bunch of different companies. I want to expand the conversation, maybe even slightly larger now, of given the fact that you have seen so many different facets of what's new in manufacturing, what's cutting edge, in an industry that, historically is very, very old. Like, how do you stay on the cutting edge, and what is most exciting to you nowadays?
Oh man, specific to like manufacturing tech.
Manufacturing tech, yeah.
I don't even know where to start. Like from the design tools, some pretty interesting new like CAD, CAE simulation type software and tools coming out. I won't even try to like name companies or anything because it's just there's too many. But all the way through from like the digital modeling, generative design tools, to the vast array of new manufacturing tools, advanced materials companies that are popping up to provide materials that are optimized for processes and or applications. That's a key part of the kind of the ecosystem too, and there's a lot of innovation happening there. Inspection equipment, some of the metrology stuff is getting really advanced. Seeing the costs come down and making them a lot more kind of accessible, I think is awesome too. We leverage robotics, automation, AI. Obviously, there's a lot of interest and focus on those kind of areas, and we're kind of at Makina. We're at this intersection of like robotics, advanced machine learning, process control, and we're leveraging a lot of the kind of foundational tools that have come out recently. We're leveraging robotics getting faster, cheaper, more precise, higher powered, faster or lower latency feedback, being able to like collect more and more sensor data and process it, and use some of these machine learning tools to then convert like scan data and sensor data from the process to update our algorithms and get more accurate parts faster. Mm-hmm. And just like there's a flywheel definitely happening in manufacturing with all these different technologies converging, which is super exciting.
Mm-hmm. Totally agree. I think one common thread of what you just mentioned is optimization at every stage within every aspect of the manufacturing cycle. One thing that we've been thinking about in terms of like, because manufacturing uniquely has so much data accessible into all different aspects of creating a product, we think that it's uniquely positioned to be very strongly disrupted by software tools. And I'm interested in your take. What we've been noticing is that there are certain types of company personas that are very excited about being transformed by, we would say like efficiency optimization, and ones that aren't. And what we've noticed is that it may stem from, there's a difference between how small and medium-sized businesses adopt new manufacturing technologies versus large enterprise. And I wanted to get your opinion on, given what you've seen of the sales cycles and business development so far, like what is your strategy of targeting small, medium-sized business versus enterprise in the way that they adopt different technologies?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. That's such like a fundamental go-to-market question too, that younger companies need to figure out, like where does my technology make the most sense at this stage, right? Where's adoption going to be the fastest and most efficient? And I guess I have sort of a little bit of a framework, depending on the maturity of the technology. If you can solve a problem quickly, if you have some sort of technology that is, I don't want to say plug and play, but like pretty ready, pretty high on the TRL, technology readiness level scale, that it can actually be adopted and implemented and like start creating value pretty quickly. Small companies are an incredible way to accelerate go to market and revenue. Small companies and like, grouping startups into that too, like they tend to be less risk averse. They move faster. There's less just baggage and bureaucracy and process and committees. And like, if you can prove to them in short order that you can kind of solve a problem, create some sort of value for them, that can be a really, really great initial customer base to get that adoption and get really good like feedback too, because they tend to be a lot more open. They tend to be more referenceable. Looking for kind of marketing examples and the value that has to build case studies around. But on the flip side, if your technology really is kind of on a longer roadmap, where you really need to work with a customer for a long time, making a large investment to optimize it, to figure out how to implement it, to help them design products around it or their business around it. If there's a lot of like inertia associated with that insertion, then I think they're like, you need to work with a big company. You need to find a sizable R&D budget that can play the long game, right? And be patient and like actually help you put together that like multi-phase approach to implementing something. If you go to a startup and you're like, hey, we need $10 million in 3 years and we're going to show you how we're going to make, this thing happen. They'll be like, we don't know if we'll be around in 3 years.
Totally. So it really depends on, I guess, the scalability of, or I guess maybe not even the scalability. It depends on how expensive, I guess, the technology that you're trying to build is in order to understand which type of marketing strategy makes the most sense.
Yeah, like the cost to implement and the cost, like they need to, it needs to be proportional to the value that you can create for them. They may be a small company, but they may make like 1 million of these widgets that you can completely address for them, right? And totally change their margin structure. And even though they're a relatively small company that has one product, like you can completely be a game changer for them. So you can't necessarily just like scope based on like customer size or spend, but it has to pencil out. You got to start doing the math.
Yeah. Have you noticed a difference in small and medium-sized businesses in different parts of the country? And the reason why I'm interested in this specifically is we've noticed like in California, as I've been based here for the majority of my career, I feel like I'm in a very Silicon Valley bubble where everything feels like it can be scaled quickly, definitely in small organizations. But as I've gone to other spots in the country where the nature of, I think specifically in the manufacturing space, like a lot of these smaller manufacturing shops, machine shops even, they don't talk to each other even. Like just because you sell to one of them does not mean you're automatically going to scale to like all of their friends. And in fact, as you mentioned very early on in our conversation, there's a huge aspect of competitiveness. Like if there's something that is truly valuable, you don't really want to share that with your friends. Do you have any insights into how to overcome that? And maybe there's no good answer, but
I mean, the manufacturing ecosystem itself, like to zoom in on that, like is pretty crazy, like in terms of all the different layers of supply chains and like figuring out, like Simon and I were talking about this like a month or two ago, like how do you figure out who you should work with in that ecosystem? Like if you want to, like, I don't know, to give an example, like most people are kind of familiar with like automotive, like if you want to sell some piece of electronics to Ford, do you go talk to Ford or do you go talk to Bosch, right? Or do you go talk to, like, depending on what that thing is, do you go talk to Bosch's supplier that specializes in that specific sensor? Yeah. So I think you got to figure out like some combination of like who's sort of realizing the value, where do you create the value, who can realize the value? Those might be two different things. And you're going to have to sort of connect those dots at some level to be successful. And then you also have to apply a layer of like, who's innovating. If you think of like, people are probably familiar with like Crossing the Chasm and like, early technology adopters, visionaries versus like the laggards. The fragmented, Midwest mom and pop manufacturer tends to be a technology laggard. Like they're not going to implement something until it literally saves them money. Yeah. Right. They don't have R&D budgets to test new cool things. They need something that works, right? That helps them very quickly create revenue from their customer. And so that tends to not be the places that new technologies really kind of grow, at an early stage. But there's some exceptions to that too.
So on that note, actually, I just published an article on a similar topic, not exactly the same, and I won't get into it too far, but I was trying to develop a thesis around, I just took like SaaS, industrial SaaS, or even RaaS, robots as a service, as an example. And you need to pretty early on figure out which of the two segments you want to go to market with, either enterprise or SMB, because I think we'd agree generally they're quite different in their approach and strategy to sell into. And I came to chatting with Sabrina and some other portfolio companies. I came to the realization that SMBs generally prefer top line revenue generating stuff. Like they're willing to spend money on new capacity, new, websites that are going to bring new customers in, that type of thing, and less likely to spend money on efficiency drivers. And enterprise generally is the opposite. Their growth has kind of stabilized, and therefore they're generally more interested in efficiency drivers like software, collaboration, traceability software, supply chain stuff. And again, there's probably corner cases and exceptions to all of this, but just it's kind of a bit of a framework that
I think that's interesting. I think that holds relatively true. I think there's also the kind of dimension of time scales, like where like small businesses really want to see fast ROI.
Yeah.
They're not going to sort of invest in the like 10-year moonshots, that you see big technology companies try to do.
Yeah.
So that's another factor too. Like you have to think about your technology, your product, and the sort of curve at which that investment actually starts returning money for the customer. And if that gets longer and longer, which is okay, as long as eventually it's a huge ROI, it can be long. You're going to tend to have to work with a bigger, still innovative, but like bigger company that can really invest long term into that.
So it comes down to I guess it comes back to the cost of everything, and like the size of the cost to develop the product that you're trying to sell, and if it makes sense for the different size businesses too.
I think there's smart business people in every company, small or big. Like they want to grow the top line and the bottom line. Like they want to make more money, right? At the end of the day, like. But yeah, I think it's an interesting point, Simon. There's so much more. Like there's whole teams set up, right, at big companies just to chase efficiency gains.
Right.
Whereas like small companies, depending on how small, like some of them can be very much more in like survival mode.
Yep. Yeah, we've seen that firsthand as well with a couple different customers that we've been trying to work with. Very, very interesting overall. I think I have a much better idea of all of the different facets within BD. In our last question for today, we wanted to end, this is something that we asked to every single participant, but who has been the most impactful person in your career so far and why?
Simon's probably hoping it, I'd say him.
Not allowed to use us. That's
not allowed to use anyone.
Simon has been impactful, but it'd be too cheesy to do this in front of him. I want to give a shout out to actually the CEO of Digital Alloys, a company that is no longer, Duncan McCallum. I think he's retired now. He's doing some philanthropic stuff. He's an incredible guy. Was a VC, like a 3-time founder. And there's a lot of things I admire about Duncan, about a lot of people that I've worked with and worked for. But one thing that really stands out about Duncan was he had this like incredible ability to sort of to ask anyone for sort of like feedback and input in a very, very authentic, genuine way. Like he really desired from like, an intern that started last week, like to know like what they think of the company so far. What things have they seen? What ideas do they have for how the company can improve? But also very personally, like every single week in one-on-ones, he would say like, Alex, you have to have some advice for me. Come with like, I'll be pissed if you don't come with one thing that you noticed I did poorly last week, because like I want to constantly grow and improve. And I've tried to, I don't do it nearly as well as him, but I've tried to take that ethos with me too. And I think it's really, really humble. Like it's powerful for like, you know, constant growth and improvement, but it's just like so humbling too and kind of genuine.
Interesting.
Absolutely. I love that. Well, definitely. Cheers to him. Thank you
Yeah.
so much for sharing your stories and your advice for all of our folks on the call. And really, really enjoyed it. Thank you so much, Alex, for your time.
This is awesome. Thanks, guys.
Thanks so much,
Thank you.
Alex. This has been
Yeah,
Beers
good.
with VC's episode 6 with Alex Huckstep. Thank you, and see you next month. Bye.
See ya.